I see my friends have arrived, so I can get started. Come in, take a seat. My name is Jess Jonas. I'm the Chief Legal Officer of the Bitcoin Legal Defense Fund, and I'm here to tell you about an existential threat to Bitcoin and open source. The systems that we are here to celebrate and promote, the networks that we develop and advance, are under attack. The attacker is somebody well known to all of us. His name is Craig Wright. For years, Wright and entities that he controls have weaponized the court systems against Bitcoin for his personal gain. The good news is that most of these attacks have been unsuccessful. This is in no small part because every time he has launched a new attack against the Bitcoin community, the Bitcoin Immune Defense System has responded and come together as a community to rally behind his victims. The bad news, however, is that this hasn't deterred Wright from continuing to attack Bitcoin. He has 2 lawsuits that are currently pending in the UK that are arguably the most high-stakes legal attacks on Bitcoin and broader open source development. The defendants in each of these cases are a group of Bitcoin core developers who have been instrumental in helping transform Bitcoin from a brilliant idea into a world-changing force for good. Now, they are facing a lengthy and expensive battle in court, solely because they volunteered their time and energy to write open source code. It is my strong belief, and the belief of the Bitcoin Legal Defense Fund, that we owe these developers our support. The potential ramifications of these lawsuits extend far beyond Bitcoin. They have grave implications for the future of open source, and they are a direct attack on our civil rights, as fundamental a right as freedom of speech. Today, I'd like to use my time to tell you a little bit about these cases and why your support is critical to helping these developers mount a strong defense. No one should have to stand trial simply for volunteering their time to write open source code. Open source code which they offer to the public for free. Open source code that carries a broad license that includes a disclaimer of liability. If you share this belief, then I ask that you show your support. Behind me is a QR code which will take you to our donations page. We are fighting not just for these individual developers who are defendants in these lawsuits. We are fighting for all of you. We are fighting for the future of Bitcoin and open source. We are fighting for your fundamental freedoms. And we think that all of you should have skin in this game. So please donate and support our work, support our fight, because if we have an army behind us, we believe we will win. So now that that's out of the way, let's dive into the first court case, which was brought against 12 Bitcoin core developers by a company that is controlled or owned by Craig Wright named Tulip Trading. Many of you have probably heard about this case already. It's been going on for a few years. The origins of this case date back to 2020, when Tulip Trading was allegedly hacked and allegedly lost 111,000 Bitcoin. The first thing to make clear is that there's no evidence that any of this actually happened. There's no evidence that Craig Wright owned any of this Bitcoin. There's no evidence that he was hacked. There was no evidence that he's lost any of this Bitcoin. Nevertheless, that did not stop Tulip from issuing a demand letter to several Bitcoin core developers claiming that they have a duty to stop illegitimate transactions from occurring on the network. In 2021, Tulip Trading filed a lawsuit in the United Kingdom against these 12 Bitcoin core developers and argued that they should be legally compelled to introduce a backdoor into the Bitcoin Core client that would allow Wright to recover the Bitcoin that he claims to have owned and that he claims to have lost. Now, many of you are probably rolling your eyes because you know how Bitcoin works. And you know that even if a judge did legally compel these software developers to take this action, they could not compel all of the network's users to accept the change to the code. It's an absurd claim. And at first, the UK courts agreed. Last year, the Court of First Instance dismissed this lawsuit and found that Tulip Trading had not established a serious issue of fact to be tried. Tulip appealed that decision, and earlier this year, a 3-judge appellate panel at the second highest court in the United Kingdom found that this was a serious issue that the court needed to evaluate at a full merits-based trial. The court asked the question of whether decentralization of Bitcoin is really a myth, and if so, whether open source developers, not limited to Bitcoin developers, open source developers should owe a fiduciary duty to the users of their code. This is the question that the UK court is going to answer over the next couple of years. Now, I realize that there's a lot of legal jargon I'm throwing out, and I'm going to sort of try and provide more information about what this all means. But the central question of whether open source developers could owe a fiduciary duty to their users is, I would say, insane from my perspective as an American lawyer. Every single American lawyer I have talked to has pretty much dismissed this as truly bonkers, using that as a term of art. Nevertheless, the UK court said in an appellate decision that yes, this would be a departure from the hundreds of years of precedent on fiduciary duty, but it is a step that they may need to take. So we cannot dismiss this as truly bonkers if the second highest court in the United Kingdom is unwilling to dismiss it. Now, fiduciary duty is a well-established legal concept. The UK courts have said it is a duty of single-minded loyalty, where the fiduciary is expected to put the principal's best interest above their own and above all others. It is an exceptionally high duty. It is, in fact, the highest duty of care that exists under the law, higher than negligence, higher than the duty that a police officer owes to the victim of a crime. There are many areas in life where people legitimately do owe a fiduciary duty to someone. Examples of these are a lawyer to their client, a trustee to the beneficiary of a trust, a corporate board to its shareholders. But Bitcoin developers, of course, do not have these counterparts. They do not have special relationships of trust with the users of Bitcoin. They do not owe them a duty of single-minded loyalty. No person or group of persons controls the network. The entire point is that this is a decentralized system that doesn't rely on trusted third parties. But what Tulip's suit is essentially claiming, if we ditch all the legal jargon, is that Bitcoin core developers do in fact control the Bitcoin network, and as such, they have a legal obligation to protect its users. In the Tulip case, what this means is they are asking for these Bitcoin core developers to introduce a backdoor into the Bitcoin core system to alter the blockchain so that Wright could divert these allegedly lost Bitcoin back to him. Now, if you're thinking, this is insane, even if Tulip Trading were to win the case, it would ultimately have no practical impact, you would be right. Even if the defendants were legally compelled to introduce a backdoor into Bitcoin Core, rhyming for all of you, so you can enjoy that, no one else on the network would be forced to use that new version. Bitcoin would fork, and Tulip Trading would be left with a bunch of worthless Bitcoin. The whole thing seems absurd. It seems like it shouldn't even be worth your time and energy. But if you feel that way, then Wright wins. The reason why this case is worth fighting and why it's so critical that we band together to help the developers to mount a strong defense is because the ramifications of this case go far beyond Bitcoin. If Tulip Trading is successful, it would have a chilling effect, not just on Bitcoin development, but on the development of all open source software that we all use in our day-to-day lives. If the English courts were to find that open source developers could owe fiduciary duties to the users of their software, this would mean that such developers could become fiduciaries to users of the software that they contributed to without any formality or assumption of duty. It would mean that the developer could undertake such a role without any knowledge of who their principals are, how many they are, or where they're located. This would undoubtedly have a chilling effect on the willingness of software developers to continue to agree to involve themselves in open source projects like Bitcoin. 97% of the world's software is open source. So if anybody thinks that this is a problem that's limited to Bitcoin that will not impact your lives, or if anybody thinks this is a UK problem and so what, London is rainy, I'm never going to go there again, you are dead wrong. The majority of the developers who are defendants in this case are US citizens, and they have been dragged into court to answer for injuries that they allegedly contributed to as a result of the work that they have done over the past decade on writing Bitcoin software. The whole thing seems far-fetched, but if you do not pay attention to it and you do not talk about it, then we will lose. And that is not something any of us can afford. There is another thing at issue here, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about it, but if you want to visit our website, which is there, bitcoindefense.org, you can read all about it. You can pull up a bunch of case documents if you really want to dig into the weeds of all of our legal arguments. But I want to remind everybody that when Bitcoin was released in 2009, it was released under the MIT license, which is one of the most popular open source licenses in the world. The MIT license contains a clause that says, quote, "In no event shall the authors be liable for any claim, damages, or other liability in connection with the software or the use or other dealings in the software," close quote. If the court rules in Tulip's favor in this case, it would undermine the central premise of the open source software license that protects developers when they release their code into the world. This would be an incredibly dangerous precedent that would disincentivize developers from working on Bitcoin and other vital open source projects. Unfortunately, it gets worse. Tulip is not the only case that we're fighting. There is another case, also initiated by Craig Wright, filed towards the end of last year, where he is suing, again, another group of Bitcoin developers as well as other industry participants. In this suit, he falls back on his sort of well-known claim that he is Satoshi Nakamoto, and he claims that as a result of that, he owns the copyright in the Bitcoin white paper and the database rights in the Bitcoin blockchain. Database rights are an obscure property right that do not exist in the US. This is all to say that the defendants in this case are being put to significant expense and headache, having to deal with yet another claim by Craig Wright. And this is not the sort of thing that can be easily dismissed out of hand. That's just not how the legal system works. If somebody brings a frivolous lawsuit and they have the money to run with it, that can take quite a long time for the court to adjudicate. The court system doesn't work such that somebody brings a claim and the judge looks at it and says, absurd, throw it out. They're obligated to hear the claim until they get to the point where they can dismiss it. If Wright were to win this other suit, it would essentially give him ultimate control over the Bitcoin network in the eyes of the law. He would be permitted to decide who uses the Bitcoin network, the terms of use of the Bitcoin network, and could also control the client software. This all seems far-fetched, but it is a real threat and is one that many of us are fighting very hard to avoid. Now for some good news. While I stand on the stage and I look at all of you, I see that we already have an army that's willing to stand up arm in arm and fight with us. So I'm out of time, and I know nobody really wants to listen to a lawyer pretty much read from her computer up on the stage. But I ask that you visit our website, you read about the cases, you donate. This is not a problem for one or two individuals to carry. This is a community problem, and it takes engagement from the entire community to fight it. The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. Do something.
Thank you, Miami, for the last 3 years in this amazing city. The whole world shut down, but Miami welcomed us with open arms. We want to show Bitcoin to the whole world. We are taking the conference on the road to set the stage for Bitcoin in a new city. Nashville. Bitcoin 2024 is coming to Nashville in Tennessee, a city that is known as a music and freedom city. Bitcoin 2024 in Nashville from July 25th to 27th.